But he was telling me that it was a bad painting, this was a bad piece of art, and he explained why. Impressionism is the conveying of the essence of light and color, essentially. You're trying to express the essence of light and color in the most vivid and real sense possible. So that's basically what he did. He looked at what he thought the artist was trying to do, the classic definition of Impressionism, and he thought, well, okay, the artist did not create a lot of contrast in light or color. They didn't have much light at all, so it's bad art. I think this is a loose form of Ayn Rand Objectivism. Like, they're pretty much saying something's good and bad, but basing it on this rigid definition of good and bad. It's not... It's crazy. Like, only the artist can really judge whether or not they did good art or bad art.
Art. It's not the case that having standards by which you judge art makes you an objectivist. So to say that some art critic, I mean, let's deal with your example that there's an art critic and that the art critic says that Impressionism requires, you know, a celebration of light and color, and that because the dimly lit flowers in your scene are not an expression of light and color, well then that's not Impressionist art. Well, let's just work with the materials you gave us. So let's say that is a, just for hypothetical, I can't say I'm an expert in Impressionism, but let's say that we accept your definition that light and color are the essence of Impressionism, and that's the standard by which an art critic will judge something to be Impressionist art or not to be Impressionist art. Well, that's simply to have a standard by which something is judged. We need standards in order to categorize everything, and you can't even think without categorizing. For example, you might have a standard for what constitutes an apple. You know, it has to have a certain hardness, it has to have a certain spherical quality, it has to have a stem at the top. You know, and these all might be true of all apples. I'm not sure if it's true for all apples, but let's just say that it is for the sake of argument. True of all apples. Well, and then you get this thing that, I don't know, it's long and pod-shaped, and it's yellow, and it's soft and gushy on the inside. It doesn't taste anything like any of the other apples. In fact, it's a banana. And now, by the standard you're setting for what is an apple, you're saying, well, this isn't an apple. It's something else. Well, it's a banana. All right? And is it wrong to judge a banana not to be an apple because it doesn't meet the strict criteria of what an apple is? Of course it's not wrong. It's the only way that two human beings can communicate anything about the nature of apples. If apple means just about anything you want it to mean, well then, if I say I've got an apple in my backpack, well geez, that doesn't tell you anything, does it? It might be shaped like a pumpkin and the size of a pumpkin. It might be the size of a pea or the shape of a pea pod. It is utterly meaningless to have a word that represents nothing in particular. It doesn't have a fixed definition. Now, Rand did have a definition of art, but to say that Rand's definition of art was the definition of Impressionism as you gave it is utterly misleading. And in fact, I'm not going to try and sit here and reiterate for you all of what she said about art, and she said a great deal about art. But I would encourage you to read the Romantic Manifesto, which is a collection of some of her essays on the subject of art. And I think if you actually read what she's said about art, and clearly you have not, and I say that with all due respect, but you clearly have not read, I would say, anything that she's said about art, or written about art, read it through and understand that she had a very clear understanding of what art was by her own philosophy. In terms of her own philosophy, it was a definition of art that was consistent with her own philosophy. But to say something's objectivist and therefore somehow wrong because it sets down strict rules for what is art and what is not art, that has nothing to do with objectivism per se. It's simply the setting of criteria. And there's, you know, objectivism is not the only philosophy that has criteria. Every philosophy has criteria. Every one of them. They're different criteria, but they all have criteria. You know, Kant had a moral imperative that had a definition. It doesn't get to mean anything you want it to mean. It means what he defined it to be. We don't just throw it out the window and call it, well, that's Kantian and clearly wrong because, you know, it's just so rigid. Rigidity is what allows you to have meaning. If apple means anything at all, it might mean house, it might mean car, it might mean fast, it might mean slow, it might mean male, it might mean female, then the word apple ceases to communicate meaning at all. And the same thing is true of art. If art is to have a meaning, if the word is to have a meaning, there have to be some criteria by which something is judged to be art and something is judged not to be art. And different people and different philosophies will have different definitions for what is art. But to suggest that Rand in particular is guilty of some crime of having specified what art is just ridiculous on its face. Everybody who has a definition for art has criteria, just like Rand. And they're absolute, just like Rand's. Even the criteria that art is anything you want it to be sets out a criteria. Want. You. Okay? These are all criteria. What do you want to be art? That in itself is a set of criteria by someone's ridiculous standard of what art is, or what the word means.